of government agencies that I've worked. I mean, I've worked for the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a funny hybrid. It's a little farther from government than most of the governments I've either worked with or worked for. But no, you're right. It still is a form of a government agency.
And I think there's this perception that, of course, politically, there's pressure within the government to make sure we get convictions. There's the private prison industry. There is, you know, the tough on crime crowd that if we have people coming into court and saying, well, these results aren't exactly accurate, or this got screwed up here, or this got screwed up there, we got people walking on technicalities, then you start to maybe get political pressure from other people. But at the same time, the general public, you know, if they don't see at least some balance in the system or some fairness in the system where people are getting those kind of results because investigators are willing to step up and say this wasn't done correctly. I mean, without that, it's almost a recipe for this. What we have is a distrust of government.
Oh, no doubt.
Within the criminal justice system.
And I think I keep trying to find a way to explain it to policymakers and decision makers, and I've worked at this now for close to 20 years of trying to figure out how to explain this. My view on it is the functioning of the justice system is a fundamental underpinning to our way of life. The rule of law is part of what makes America work. It's part of what makes companies willing to invest here. It's part of what makes the economy run. Underpinning that, and I think all of the NCIS shows, and this goes back, really hundreds of years, it goes back to the start of the country, of people's desire to see the scientific evidence. I point out in a lot of places when I talk about this, do you know who George Wythe is?
No.
So George Wythe was the country's first professor of law.
Somebody I probably should know.
You probably should.
Given the fact that I possess a law degree.
Like you kind of help.
And you're
so the science nerd is educating the lawyer.
Right. Clearly I'm not a lawyer.
I will nerd out with you any day, by the way. This is awesome. Okay.
But George Wythe was, he was a signatory on the Declaration of Independence. He was so key he taught Thomas Jefferson. They saved him a place because he was one of the last signatories on the Declaration of Independence. They saved him a place to sign. George Wythe lived to be 81 years old and was murdered. He was poisoned. And at the time of the trial on this, it was billed as the trial of the century, and it was a battle of experts, and it was a battle over the fact that the scientific test for arsenic that was newly out there wasn't performed appropriately. The medical examiner's report, it was a coroner report at that point, but didn't do the autopsy properly. It was the same thing you hear today.
Yeah.
At the start of the country.
Not much has changed.
So I contend, our fascination with these things is because people intuitively understand that there has to be, they have to have that kernel of some kind of objective truth that underlies this justice system for them to believe that it's going to treat them fairly. And yeah, it really rankles me that we have jeopardized this remarkable system that's been laid out simply because we have allowed the corruption of the forensic evidence. You think the Annie Dukins that are out there, you heard of Annie Dukin?
I'm going to have to say no again.
Okay, so Annie Dukin.
You're asking me about people, and I'm just like, I'm stuck at hello. This is embarrassing.
Dukin, yeah, but Annie Dukin, I love it. She's been referred to as the Fukushima of forensics. She was a drug chemist in a municipal laboratory in Massachusetts. One laboratory.
Oh yeah, everybody's case got dismissed, like 300,000 of them or something.
Oh come on! Now all of a sudden you know.
Yes, I know that.
Once I start telling you,
I'm the one host that's stumped here.
She falsified, plain up, made up 60,000 results, compromised 24,000 cases. State of Massachusetts spent.
I'm familiar with the case. I didn't know the name.
Yeah.
$10+ million. She served 3 years, 5 years, something like that, and they just vacated all 24,000 cases because they never fixed it. That kind of stuff is horribly corrosive to the trust in the entire justice system.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, this is a country founded on distrust of government. And the problem is, to me, the shows you're talking about, NCIS, Law and Order, to me, they really do a disservice because I feel like jurors come in and they're like, well, if that person who's an expert in forensic science says it's so, it must be so. And you know, I just feel like that has been the biggest disservice in our criminal justice system is that jurors come in already preconditioned, thinking that it's infallible.
Yeah.
That science is infallible.
And science, by definition, a scientific measurement has an error rate. It has a variance to it. You try and make it as small as you can, but there has to be an error rate to it. Now, your question in there someplace was, what are we doing to try and change the arc on this? I think this is in part because I've got a board that's very supportive of this. In fact, they're demanding of it. Good thing. Some of it is the transparency of the information. And it's not just throwing it all up there, but it's trying to make it there in an organized, searchable fashion that you can actually use. Put it there, but you've got to believe that we're going to put everything up there. That's going to take time. It takes things like this, of me coming, being willing to talk to anybody and everybody about what we're doing. One of the things I'm the most proud about, one of the things I really wish people would pay more attention to, I am a gigantic proponent of blind testing. So we've got a version of what I call blind controls that run in toxicology, latent prints, biology, controlled substances, and firearms. The goal is to get it across everything, but we manufacture case materials. So toxicology is the most mature on this. So we have, it's actually an outside company that manufactures samples for us that then we mock up to look like cases. They're submitted in through HPD's property room, so they come to our system as though they're cases. They go through the system without the analyst knowing whether they've got hold of a case material or one of these mock cases. We know they're manufactured at different concentrations of drugs and alcohol, and they run through the system, and we can track that and now look at that. My goal is to have that run through the system at my number that I've picked. And I work with a number of statisticians to try and refine this. I've got a couple of proposals out on research to try and help refine this further. But to run these at a 5% rate so that there's enough of a chance at any point in time that an analyst knows they are going to be confronted with one of these. We've run about, in the last year and a half, we've run about 300 of these through the system. So they expect to see them there. We know how they should be performing, but it also gives us a handle on being able to evaluate the system. So like in toxicology, with what we've run through there, I can stay with statistical assurance. So at a 95% confidence level, I can say that there is no statistical difference between analysts. I can say there is no statistical difference between days. I can say there is no statistical difference between instruments, between pipetters. I can look at the variance of these known materials moving through the system and know that the percent variance of those results is, for most of the concentrations, less than 1%. So that's across analyst, across day, across calibration, across batch. Those are the kinds of power that allow us to evaluate the entire system, but also to help control for. I've scratched my head for years of how do you head off an Annie Dugan, somebody that is willfully after suborning the system. Somehow you have to put a control into the system that she's systematically
one person
Yeah.
doing that kind of thing. Sooner or later, you're going to see it in a blind.